Hello, listeners. Welcome to yet another episode of the Courage Talks. Special guest today is Tracy Brown. Tracy is a mindfulness coach. She's one of the empaneled coaches with Coacharya. And I'll let Tracy complete the introduction. Welcome, Tracy, on board.
So happy to be here. I always feel a little awkward introducing myself, so I'll keep it brief. But yes, I'm a coach. I'm a PCC coach, a professional certified coach with credentials from ICF. And I'm also a mindfulness teacher. And yes, we met through Coacharya, where I also do some facilitation for coach education and mentoring. So that's a tiny bit about me professionally anyways.
Wonderful. Yeah, of course, we'll definitely come up on your coaching bit, but I think what interested me in your profile was your personal journey. And, Courage Talks is all about courage. The story goes, it's based on the book that I wrote, which is my dad's biography called Against All Odds. And I was inspired by the kind of challenges and the kind of tough times which my dad went through in his personal life. And it's been a mission since then for me to, get people on board on my podcast and hear their stories of courage. And when you talk about courage, the immediate word which comes to mind is resilience. And, you, Tracy, have displayed resilience a lot in your personal life, right? From being a young mother, losing your husband at an early age, and then, literally rebuilding your life from scratch. Where do you get all this energy from?
That's an interesting question. Where I get my energy from now and where I got it from then, I think is very different. At the time, I probably just didn't have a choice. So I had young children. And as you said, my husband died quite young. And so I just had to keep going. And that's what I did.
But the events as they occurred, did it kind of help you look within? You look for support? Who was your inspiration? Who was your idol? Whom did you look up at that point of time?
Oh, wow. I don't even know if I can go back there to say that. I think I did not look within. So I'll let you know that much right now. I've learned a lot since then, but at the time, I was 24 years old. I had 3 young kids. My husband committed suicide, so that was on top of, a sudden death. It was one that comes connected with a lot of stigma, a lot of shame. And so I kind of armored myself, I think. And I went on with life from a very sort of forward-looking perspective, and I didn't necessarily at that time. I know I didn't take the time to grieve. I didn't take the time to really process everything that happened. And yeah, I don't know if I can say who my hero or my figure was. I had a lot of support from my family, support with my children, and what I really found myself putting most of my energy towards was my career. And in retrospect, I wish that, of course that was necessary. In retrospect, I also have a different perspective that I would have loved to see myself also putting energy towards myself, towards my family, towards being there emotionally for my children.
Let's take a step back. What was growing up like? What do you recollect of your childhood days? Where did you grow up? Take us back. Give the audience and the listeners a bit deeper background about you.
Oh boy, how long do we have? So, because I'm 53. So growing up, I grew up in a family of 4. My parents were, and still are, quite religious. They're Jehovah's Witnesses. So that's a very evangelical, Christian religion. And we grew up I'm Canadian, so I grew up in Canada, mostly in Toronto. And my parents were and are very loving, but they were also young. They never had a lot of money, and they were very strict, right? They were, trying to raise us up to what they saw as Bible principles. And I was the first of 4. So I think I was the one that they were the hardest on. I know there's a lot of people now that identify with having ADHD. I was actually diagnosed as a young child with what they called hyperactivity at the time. So I was extremely impulsive. And so I would just do things without thinking. And my parents definitely couldn't understand it. I couldn't understand why I was always doing things that got me into trouble.
Yeah.
I was also, and still am, very adventurous. I've always been interested in learning more, seeing more, doing more. And so when I was a teenager, I think around 14, I decided I wanted to leave the religion. And I do have to say for my parents that despite that choice, which was very difficult for them at the time, it's not like they kicked me out of the house or anything like that. There was some adjustment around it, but they accepted it. And I left home at 16 though. I left home at 16. At this time, I was kind of wild. I had started like drinking and partying and all of these things. Dropped out of school, left home, and had a couple of wild years before I got pregnant with my oldest son. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I decided it was time to settle down. And so I ended up marrying the father, had 2 more kids. And by the time I was 20, I had actually 3 children. Was a very ambitious and not, I wouldn't necessarily suggest it for, although I'm very happy that that happened now. It was fun.
No, I know when you narrated your story, I could recollect that, in today's day and age, being in a situation that you were at that point of time, it's very difficult to visualize, right? And we all realize that end of the day everything gets sorted out, right? And now you can sit back and maybe laugh about it in terms of the situation that you were, but at that point of time, of course, what you went through was something which was very difficult, right? When you went through all these incidents, in fact, there's a beautiful book called Life is in the Transitions. And it came up with a term called life quakes, right? And I would say that you had multiple life quakes in your life and in your career. At any point of time, did you push it all to fate? Did you take that as a challenge? Were you like a eternal optimist where you said, okay, things will pass, like we just gone through COVID and, people have gone through multiple life quakes and COVID as well. So what was your motto? What was your mission? What was the driving force which kept you sane? I'm assuming you remained sane because you come out as a brilliant coach and you've been a source of inspiration for a lot of, future coaches as well. So I'm sure you came out very sane and strong, right? But what drove you at that point of time through all these life quakes, as I would call it?
It's interesting that you talked about optimism. I think that has been a saving grace for me. It's something that comes to me very naturally. It's sometimes been my downfall because sometimes I can be a little too optimistic and less realistic. So now I'm kind of going for what they call realistic optimism. But yeah, I always have had faith that things will get better. And so I think that even when I've had the darkest moments, I realize that, okay, they'll pass and, I'll wake up tomorrow and things I might feel differently. And I think I've gone through so many of those periods where I've realized that I've always come out the other side one way or another. So yeah, I think really maybe optimism and faith. And when I say faith, I don't mean faith in a God or anything like that, but faith in the fact that there's rises and falls in life. And so if I'm down falling, eventually have to come back up. It's just a given.
In a recent coaching conversation, we debated about compassion and empathy, right? And of course, today we can talk about what these words mean to us, but who demonstrated compassion and empathy during your tough times? Who are the people who eventually ended up being the support points in your career and in your life journey?
My mother, for one, has always been very loving, very compassionate. So I would say that she would be my first lesson towards what compassion is all about. I also have had a lot of support from other family members, like my aunt, my cousin, just people that were there for me, even when I didn't necessarily think I needed people to be there for me. And yeah, and I think when I think about the difference, we got into a big debate around compassion and empathy, but I would say that mainly for me, compassion has been the driving force. Because sometimes I didn't even want somebody to empathize with me. I wasn't willing to face my feelings. So if somebody was mirroring them to me, I found that very difficult, right? But to have somebody be there and support me, no matter how I was showing up in life, I think that takes true compassion. And I've felt that. I felt that even from, I would say, both of my parents who, I still don't live my life aligned with their beliefs. And yet I know they love me and are always there to support.
In your write-up, you mentioned that, while you got external support, you always felt trapped inside. You felt that you were not able to come out or you were not able to express as much as you wanted to. Did mindfulness and semantic awareness kind of help you? What are the support systems internally that you resorted to?
So I was very emotionally blocked for years and years. especially I think the turning point was my husband's death. I, at some point, really like saw myself. I remember myself pulling out from myself and almost feeling like I was observing my life, but not in a witnessing sort of mindful way, in a like I'm removing myself from feeling too much. And it was probably very necessary for me at that point in time to be able to go on. Unfortunately, that's where I stayed for many years, and I just threw myself, like I said, into work and into a lot of distractions. And so it wasn't until after I came back here in 2018, I moved down here in 2016. I'm living currently in Nicaragua. And I moved down here in 2016 and thought that would change everything. And, there's that saying, wherever you go, there you are. So I realized that like all the unhealthy habits that I thought would switch because, I was changing my life and not working as hard. I ended up working as hard. I ended up doing a lot of the things that I did back in Canada because I was still feeling driven to not face what was happening within. And it was really in 2018 when I came back here, I had to leave kind of unexpectedly and a lot of things switched. I lost had a huge life event where I lost my best friend who I've known my whole life. And so I was coming back here and just kind of trying to figure out what was next. And I started going to yoga, been practicing yoga on and off for years, but I started going on a regular basis. And the woman at the yoga studio also taught meditation. So I started meditating on a regular basis. And that's when it first started happening. That's when I first started kind of peeling the layers of all the busyness that I had put over my emotions and started being actually able to connect and like started actually being able to grieve my husband's death, which I hadn't done. Like at this point, it had been many, many years after he passed away. It's still a journey. But I think that being more connected with my body and being more okay with tuning into myself and being okay with being alone. I used to dread being alone, and now I look forward to it. So,
right. You mentioned about, losing your husband early. You were a mother of 3 kids, and literally the entire responsibility of bringing them up fell on your shoulders. How did you scale up as far as your corporate career was concerned, your work career was concerned? Take us through your work journey as well before we come to the coaching part.
Well, it's pretty varied. So around the time that my husband died, I was working for the government, working for the federal government, and I was working in kind of payroll and benefits. And I took a leave after that and spent some time kind of figuring out what was next. And then I decided, just for practical reasons, that I was going to go into accounting. Originally, it was just bookkeeping. And then I decided, no, I really want to go for it. I really want to, get certified as a, and that was a really good lesson for me, that because it was a bit of a vindication, because at school I had never done well in math. I would never have been the person that anyone would say, oh yeah, Tracy's going to become an accountant. So it was a bit of a vindication for me that I was like, see, I can do these things. And I went for about 3 years to school. I got a job in accounting, kind of started working my way up the ladder until I was in middle management there. And I realized like, this is not what I want to do. It didn't make me happy. It was a real lesson that like, just because I'm good at something doesn't necessarily mean that it's good for me or that's, what I'm meant to do. And so I decided I wanted to do something more creative. And I did something that was like probably very irresponsible at the time, but it all worked out. Quit my job. I decided I would actually go back to the idea of bookkeeping and do some freelance bookkeeping until I figured out what was next. And actually one of the companies that I did bookkeeping for, they worked in fashion and there was an opening there. And so I took the opening, started off as part-time with them, then became office manager. And within 7 years or so, I was as director of the agency. So that was my journey there. And I loved fashion. It gave me a lot of distractions. There's lots of parties to go to. It was very creative, lots of interesting people. And I also really took a lot of pride in, the work that I did. As I mentioned to you before, that eventually led to a state where it wasn't sustainable for me to continue living my life the way that I was living it.
And how did Nicaragua happen?
It was, again, a very interesting twist in fate. So I, at this point, was working at the agency. As I mentioned, I was the director. I was traveling a lot back and forth because we had an office in Montreal as well. So I was going back and forth to Montreal. I was also helping friends of mine who had started a hotel get it up and running. So I was doing that on weekends. At one point, I was volunteering for the Paralympics. So it was, at this point, I think I was doing everything I could to avoid actually just being with myself. My kids were older as well, so they didn't need me as much. They weren't as around. And my parents, who, like I said, we never had money growing up, and they've always lived by very modest means. We had all invested in a house together that we lived in when I was in my 20s. I lived with them for maybe about a year and a bit. Anyways, they ended up selling, and the Toronto real estate market had just gone to these insane levels. So my parents decided they wanted to move to Mexico and have a more simple life. They had gone there to visit my sister, and my grandmother had passed away. So they didn't really have any more responsibilities in terms of looking after their parents. So they sold the house and made a decent profit off of it and gifted all of us children some money. My dad had a theory of like, why would you have to wait for us to die to enjoy it? So I did. I had some money for the first time in my life. I used to be paycheck to paycheck, no matter how much I earned. I managed to spend it. And then I thought, wow, what I'm going to do the most responsible thing. Like, people were talking to me about like investing in the real estate market in Canada and doing all these things. And I thought, nope, I'm going to use this opportunity to move to a foreign country and do something that I've never done before, which had been a dream of mine for years. So that's what I did.
Very interesting. You've been through multiple life quakes or changes, as I mentioned, right? On the personal front, losing someone, financial challenges, health challenges, and so on and so forth. And coming to the coaching profession, right? We are ready for anything and everything. When a coachee signs up and says they want to have a session, we can expect anything out of the world, right? Especially for a life coach, right? If it's a career coach or a business coach, you're still narrowing down certain situations. What do you think, the fact that you've gone through different personal life challenges, does it become a asset for you when you're interacting with your coachees? Or does it at some point of time, I won't use the word liability, but does it become a baggage, or does it become a hurdle for you to be able to give that strong support to the coachee in the conversation? Just take us through those situations where you would have technically been very emotional, and yet you had to hold back your feelings because you obviously don't want to be personally involved, and be able to retain a more neutral stance in the coaching conversation.
Well, one thing, and I don't know if this is directly answering your question, but one thing that I became very aware of is how much I'm impacted by other people's energy and emotions. And I didn't really become aware of that until I went through the coaching journey. And that was an amazing realization for me. It was actually a gift to realize that, because up until then, I wouldn't understand why, like, if somebody was in a bad mood, I'd be in a bad mood, right? If somebody was elated, like, I was so affected by that. And so having to regulate when I'm with a client has been incredibly powerful for me to be able to do that in other aspects of my life. In terms of my experiences, I really try to, like, we aren't our stories, right? Yes, of course, they're a part of how we've been shaped and what we're made of. It's more about how we're making meaning. It's more about the choices that we make now. And yes, our stories may have led up to those, but they don't need to govern everything that we do. And so I think that if anything, I try to leave aside my experiences in a coaching session and just use that understanding of like unconditional positive regard, right? That everybody has the ability at any point to make the changes that they need to make, even if not externally as of yet. Sometimes our external circumstances will take quite some time to change, but internally. And so I try to hold that space for clients. And I think the only time that like I've ever felt challenged, and again, I have to see it and let it go, is if a client says something that I feel might imply some level of judgment around the way I've lived my life, not about me directly, but perhaps around other people. And so then I'll feel that for a moment. And then I also let that go, because we all have judgment.
That's true. That's true. Very interesting. And when it comes to looking within, you mentioned that yoga and meditation were major factors which helped you to be able to look within. And when it comes to coaching conversations and you try to encourage the client or the coachee to look within, it can be intimidating at times, right? So how do you address that situation? How do you reassure the client that it's okay to confront your fears, if I would say that?
I mean, I feel like, again, it can't be something that I'm directly telling them. They have to see it for
Yeah.
themselves, right?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
same as I needed to see it for myself. And so the best way to have that happen is to hold the space for them,
Yeah.
so that, like, if they're fearful, I'm still
Yeah.
responding to them in a way where I'm seeing that, but I'm still accepting them. And I'm still feeling, I guess that's where optimism comes in, right? I still feel optimistic that they're going to move beyond that. And then I do my best to try to, like, support them by asking questions to look at different perspectives, even to the point where it's like befriending the fear. Where is this fear coming from? What's it trying to tell you? What message is it giving you?
That's very interesting. And I think, if you personally ask me, for me, the transformative journey which I've had is more of a reassuring force. It's more like a reason for me to stay rock solid and not get emotionally attached or involved in a coaching conversation. That's step one. And obviously, you can't stop at that, right? You need to take to the transition journey as well. And when it comes to the transition journey, allowing the individual, the coachee, and the client to take time, not to rush through. Maybe I shouldn't use the word enjoy, but to absorb or fully go within and not get jittered, because you're giving them the space, you're giving them that opportunity to express, you're giving them that opportunity to take their time and not rush through, allows the client to be able to look at the same situation from a different perspective. Of course, it can't happen in one session, it can't happen in 60 minutes. But once you've set the platform, I think, over a period of time, the individual will finally realize. And of course, certain realizations might not happen during the conversation at all, but it might happen subsequently when the individual has their own free time, right? And I think today's day and age, that's a big challenge, that people are not willing to give enough time to a particular situation to unravel, for them to be able to see the deeper meaning behind that, right? I mean, if I've had an accident, can I look at my accident in a positive light? Immediately, no, right? The first thing I'll start is, I'm going to blame the other person who hit me. I'm going to blame the situation. I'm going to blame the friend who came late and that's why the accident happened. I'm going to blame the vehicle. And finally, I'm going to blame God. But I would not be willing to look at it from a positive light perspective for a very long time. I had a wrist fracture 2 weeks before my Ironman. And I went ahead and actually did the Ironman with the fractured wrist. And I cycled for 7 hours with a fractured wrist. And for me, the driving force was, I looked at that as a positive. And I said, hey, there are millions of people who are doing Ironman every year. I mean, all over the world. How many have a fractured wrist? Very few, right? So I said, okay, I'm going to be one of that. I took that as a positive light. So you can only do that if you are allowing yourself to think, right? I have this situation in my hand. If I just blame my God and go back home and not participate, I'll never know whether I could have participated in the Ironman or not. So I took that as a positive light as well. When it comes to positivity, obviously it's take time, and your reflection is an activity which I take up a lot, right? I reflect on my growing up days. I reflect on my time in Japan, and I try and see those experiences from a positive light, and try and draw inspiration in terms of the future. What is my past teaching me about being prepared for the future? Now, you had three drastically different careers in terms of accounting, in terms of fashion, now in coaching. What are the drawing inspirations that you take from these three careers? What are the aspects which remain with you as your strong point when you look at these three careers?
I think, I mean, for one, when I decided to go after a specific career, I didn't let the idea of not having done it before or maybe not even being good at it stop me. And so that was one. It was just like, I think that's where that faith comes in, where that optimism comes in, and really, like, building, when we see something that we want, really start living in it and then building towards it, even if we're not there yet. And, like, what you beautifully said about time, because we have to give it time. Like, if I had, quit my job and decided I was going to go into bookkeeping, and then I decided that it wasn't happening for me because I wasn't, I was applying to a lot of different places, like ad agencies and stuff. And I didn't have the experience. And then an opening came up, and I took it. And even there, it took a long time to go to prove to them that I would go from someone, didn't have any, that was coming in from with a very like straight and narrow financial background to being able to represent creative people. But the point is that I gave it time, and it eventually happened because I was convinced that I could do it. And I guess maybe
Mm.
that's the second thing. If you know you can do something, you can do something.
Yeah.
And right.
Yeah.
And it might not be the way, like, if you say to yourself, I'll do it within this amount of time, then it may not happen that way and you're going to get frustrated. But if you just say, hey, I know I can do it, and I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'll be able to do it, it'll happen.
That's very well said. And when it comes to coaching, you're not just coaching, you're a coaching mentor as well, right? You're enabling the coaching journey for other people like me as well, right? And that's an element of giving, that's an element of helping, right? And your profession, unlike many other professions, is more humanitarian in nature. It's helping more people help others, right? And you mentioned that this is not something which came to you naturally, and doesn't come to us, all of us, naturally, right? For a very long time in our life and career, we are totally focused on ourselves, me, my family, my parents, my kid, everything related, and my country, right? Everything related to me is my priority, right? Everyone else, go fetch for yourself, right? But the day when you decide that you are not on this planet just for yourself, but you have a bigger meaning and a bigger purpose, then things obviously change, right? So what triggered this change in you? What helped you to be able to get out of that cocoon and then say, hey, if I just focus on my life and be brooding over what I have gone through, or where I stand, I'll probably not achieve as much as I can if I decide to start helping others and becoming a change maker in their lives, right? So what was that transition period for you like, and what triggered the whole change?
So it's interesting. When I decided to go into coaching, I'd been intrigued by it for a while, but it was also like kind of a practical decision because I had done some level of it in the job that I had in fashion. We represented creative professionals and we did a lot of career coaching. And so I saw it as helping other people. It was a little more ego based. I'm not going to lie. I was like, oh, I'll be able to help other people because of my wisdoms, And of course, as you now know, and anyone that just goes through the journey, that's not what it's all about. So that was a bit of an awakening for me. I think that, and this is the thing, I think that we have to do the work within. Like we have to be okay to sit with ourselves, to feel what we're feeling, to be in silence, to face our, to not even face our demons, to like embrace them. And only then are we going to be able to really show up in the world where we're making a difference. So I think that like until we're able to look within, I don't want to put this out as a blanket statement. I'll just say it for myself. Until I was able to look within, any sort of vision of me helping others was done from the perspective of my ego as opposed to my heart.
That's very well said. It's as I mentioned, it doesn't come easy, but I'm glad that it came finally for you, which obviously helping hundreds of coaches or maybe thousands of coaches at some point of time really play a transformative role in someone else's journey as well, right? The other aspect which is talked about a lot is work-life balance, right? And in coaching, while some people might think it's pretty convenient to just sit across a desk and help someone, just talk with someone, it obviously takes a lot of emotional toll, even a physical toll as well, because it's not easy just listening to other people's stories and not getting emotionally attached as well. So it's very important to draw that balance between work and life. And so how do you draw that balance? What are your quote unquote chill out activities which help you to be able to retain that sense of balance in your daily life and your routine?
So this is still, I'll admit that this is still a learning for me because I find that I get into a point where I'm like, yeah, I've got this work-life balance. And then all of a sudden an influx of work comes in and then it's all off, because I'm like, oh, I need to take it while it's here, which is a bit of a scarcity complex, I guess. So what I'm working on is recognizing that like I have to be well in order to do the work that I do. And so I keep coming back to having a morning routine that involves me not looking at my phone before I've been up for at least 90 minutes. And having that morning routine involve meditation, involve journaling, involve movement, having one day a week that I don't open my laptop at all. And what I've recently come to as well is only having meetings on certain days. So having a few days that I just don't have the interactions. If I were able to meet people in person, I think I could do it 5 days a week. But the fact that we're all on Zoom and staring at our digital screens all the time, that in and itself is exhausting. So I'm trying to be more aware of that. The other thing is also not looking at my screen after a certain nights. So it really comes to setting boundaries and staying with them and realizing that anytime I violate those boundaries, I'm making the choice to violate them. I'm the one that's deciding that, oh no, I'm letting another person's needs come in front of my own. So I really have to sit with that.
And yeah, you mentioned about the impact and influence of meditation, and for a very long time being a runner, I used to call running as my meditation. Till I actually started meditating, I realized what I was doing, right? I mean, you can't simply be calling running a meditation, right? Meditation is so silent and so involved in activity. It can't be clubbed with something like running, for heaven's sake, right? But then again, you obviously try to imbibe aspects or facets of meditation in your daily life. And I believe the real benefit of meditation is not the 10-20 minutes that you're meditating. It's when you are in a situation which really anguishes you, angers you, frustrates you, and yet, if you're able to maintain your calm and balance and peace of mind, that's where meditation is actually working out, right? A lot of people get frustrated after those 10 minutes of meditation. They're like, I didn't feel anything. I just wasted my 10 minutes, right? And that joke goes around, right? Hey, why don't you meditate? It's better than just sitting and doing nothing. So yeah, I think that aspect is true. And talking about meditation and yoga, right? A lot of people talk about, hey, Eastern philosophy implemented in the Western world. The Western world doesn't have any philosophy or anything of that sort. And since you're from West, it's probably more appropriate for me to ask that question. I mean, like, without aspects like meditation, yoga, does the Western world really find their own ways, or is it something which is now kind of got balanced? Because obviously it's not yesterday or today, right? I mean, these philosophies have floated around for a very long time, right? Do you believe that now meditation is more global, or do you think it's still, it's something which requires a lot of self belief to really actually practice yoga meditation?
I think it's becoming a lot more global, and it's definitely a lot more present in like the Western world, and as is mindfulness and yoga. But it's been an interesting evolution, right? Like when I first got into yoga, it was for fitness, and I think that was the way it was perceived for the longest time. It was just that it was a way. Madonna was doing Ashtanga,
Yeah.
and she had a really amazing body, and so people wanted to get into yoga.
Yeah.
And that was definitely what drove me towards it. It wasn't resonate with the spiritual connection with it. Now I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, they've become trendy in some ways. And it's really interesting. There is, I understandably some judgment around that, because anytime that you appropriate something and you
Yeah.
don't really really honor the roots of it,
Yeah.
there's issues. Having said that, that's how I came to it. Like I was in a studio in a country that I wasn't born in a studio where there was a white woman teaching meditation and yoga. And yet through that, I've made so many changes in my life, and it has opened up a journey for me spiritually. So I think I'm even trying to coming to that even when it comes to my parents, because I struggled for a while with their religion. But I feel like any time that something inspires someone to change in any way, to look within, to open up their hearts, to make a difference for themselves and for others, then it's working, right?
Yeah.
And so even if it's not the way that it should be or the way that we would like to see it, it's making a difference. And so I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I'm happy to see. Listen, I'll not go on a political rant, but
Yeah.
as you know, we exist in very capitalistic societies where money is prioritized over everything else, right? Money and
Yeah.
time. Neither of them
Yeah.
are real. And so anything that sort of allows us to shift beyond that and connect to life for what it is, I
Yeah.
say, why not?
That's true. That's awesome. That's well said. The other topic which we talk a lot about is books, right? So, couple of books which you would recommend for the audience and the listeners. something which has stayed with you for a very long time, something we can just rattle off and say, this is like a must-read book or books for that
Yeah,
matter?
so The Four Agreement is incredible. Highly recommended. It's a very small book, very simple, and it's something that every time I go back to it, I have moments. I learn something. So that will be one. And creative visualization is amazing. We spend a lot of time worrying about what we don't want. If
Yeah.
we can actually instead visualize what we do want, that's a very
Yeah.
powerful journey. And the other one is The Art of Possibility. It's written by a couple, Benjamin something Zandler, and I
Yeah.
think his wife is Rosamund. That's an incredible read. So there are three very different books. I
Yeah.
recommend all of them.
No, fantastic collection, and it's always nice to hear you talking about books because you're so passionate about them. You know them so well. You read them cover to cover, and actually you are in a profession which allows you to imbibe all these aspects which you learn from books and include them in your profession as well. So finally, this is the last section where I switch the mic around. What's the question that you have for me?
What is the most courageous thing you've done today?
Ah, one thing which I don't talk about much is the fact that I went to Japan in my professional career. I went to Japan when I was fairly young. I had just been to spend 1 year working in Bangalore after my MBA, and I moved to Japan way back in the year 2000. And for 10 flat years, I was in Japan. I was doing exceedingly well at work. Wipro, the organization that I work for, I was growing up in the ranks. I had started as an individual contributor, became a leader, managed multiple service lines, multiple verticals. Personally, life was good. Our daughter was getting great education. Japan is a beautiful place to live. Quality of life is excellent. The people are wonderful. And yet I decided to move back to India in 2010. And typically the belief is that when you leave India for work anywhere abroad, you probably settle down for good. Unlike US or UK, citizenship was not an advantage in any way, right? We would not even get citizenship. And a lot of people migrated from Japan to US. They said we don't want to go back to India. It's like going to be a step backwards. But me and my family, we decided to come back to India, and I think that was a big risk at that point of time because culturally we were kind of out-tuned. We were more comfortable in a nice culture, and then to move from Tokyo to a place like Delhi, which is extremely chaotic and known for its a brash and rash culture. Initial couple of months, and we moved in the month of April and May, which is peak summer. I still remember the guest house which we initially stayed in didn't have a proper AC as well. We didn't have a car of our own. We literally had to depend on taxis, and this is pre Uber days, right? So it was not we could just open your phone out and flag a taxi, and also there were multiple challenges which I encountered. Engaging with Indians on a day-to-day basis at work. It might sound awkward when I say this, but it was actually a big challenge to work in an Indian culture environment back again after all this while. So that was, I think, a big risk I took, and I think in hindsight it turned to be a extremely good decision, both personally and professionally, because personally it allowed me to spend more time with my parents, and obviously to be back in the Indian culture always is a good thing. And India was picking up at that point of time, so I think I was able to come back at the right time to be able to settle in and regroup as well. And I think professionally as well, I got a chance to work with other companies like Microsoft, which probably was not as easy while I was in Japan because the options were limited. I think so. While I would have probably said my Ironman decision, but I thought, let me talk about something different which has not been known so far. I think that was probably the biggest risk I took, and I think I'm glad that it worked out well.
I was just going to say, as I'm sure you know, but when we're at our last day, whenever it is, and if we know that it's going to be our last moment, it's the risks that we didn't take that we most regret rather
Oh yeah,
than the risks that we
that's true.
did. Right? So,
That's true.
yeah.
Yeah, they say, right, you always regret the things which you did not do. You'll never regret the things which you did. Yeah, because ultimately everything pans out well. I mean, initially you might say, oh, there are going to be a lot of challenges, blah blah, and all, but ultimately everything pans out well, and we come out alive. If you don't come out alive, we don't know. We won't have time to ruminate over it anyway.
Yes,
Yeah.
well said.
But thanks a lot, Tracy. It was fantastic walking through your phenomenal journey. You are definitely a source of inspiration for a lot of people as a coach. But, with your background story and the kind of life quakes that you've gone through, I'm sure, a lot more people will get inspired. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Yeah. Thank you.